Tuesday in Holy Week, Christ our teacher. We have seen Jesus ride in as a king, and we have watched him turn out of the temple all who dishonor it. Now we move to the third act of this great drama. But mark you, this is no play that we contemplate, no representation of history long ago. Perhaps the greatest play about these events is still Oberammergau. There was a passion play once, which related everything through the eyes of Christ upon the cross. These things of which the eyes upon the cross spoke so vividly and poignantly happened at a point in time when God in history acted and suffered. These sufferings and actions are part of the whole life of Christ, and so we, in a mystical sense, are made present to them. We, in 2021, hold out to the Christ of eternity our love and grief as we watch him move day by day forward to the cross. Surely there must have been much talk on this third day in a somewhat subdued crowd in the temple. Had the dealers, the money changers, crept back in again by the time Jesus came in and settled down to teach the people? Perhaps some came back ready to dispute his right to upset them. Others, perhaps, sat nearby, waiting to see what happened before they ventured back again. Maybe the temple guards were sent to protect them in their trade. No doubt the temple coffers benefited from their scams. Perhaps some were changing their ways, had faced up to their double dealing, and pondered on the words of this strange prophet. No doubt everyone would be aware of the small authoritative group that made its way round to Jesus and asked for his credentials. After all, the leaders of the temple could hardly pretend to ignore the fracas of the previous day. They were caught straight away by Jesus. He gave them question for question. Where did John get his authority? They could not give him answer for answer, for if they declared for God, they showed themselves in the wrong. If they declared against, the people would be in an uproar. There must have been many heads that nodded and laughed at their discomfort. They are happy who dwell in your house. The teacher's house, the oldest and still the most powerful way of teaching within a small and trusted circle. Knowledge and confidence are exchanged, respect and love nurtured. The house of God should breathe the presence of the Lord. And having accused the unfaithful members of the household to their faces, the greatest teacher of the law has sat down to continue that accusation. Many prophets had come to Jerusalem and to the temple, and had quoted the wrath of God revealed to them, and foretold the end of unrepentant sinners and rebels. Here now is a new quality. This man does not quote, he declares truth at first hand. Can it be that here is the living God, the King, the Judge, sitting in the outer parts of the temple? All are listening. Something stirs in them, and they listen. The story of the two sons is as familiar to us as to them. The father demands help from his sons and gets a smooth answer from one, "Yes, of course I'll go," and a surly refusal from the other, "Can't you see I'm busy? I've more to do than run round on your errands." Yet each one thinks further on what he has answered. Perhaps there is a change of heart, perhaps not. In the first, perhaps he never intended to go at all, and was simply keeping the old man quiet with a polite answer. The second did not want to go at all, and said so plainly. But afterwards his heart warmed towards his father and his duty, and he went and obeyed him. Jesus knew well the smooth tongue and hidden heart of men, the bland lie that covered an unruly resentment, the insidious reason that weaves a justification for self-pleasing. His heart was with the open man who sinned and then was sorry, who saw his sin gathering like an oil slick off the shore, and fought it as best he could. So Jesus picked up the chicanery and deceit he had so fiercely condemned the previous day, and went on to attack directly the Sadducees and Pharisees with the story of the slaughtered heir. The stewards of an estate were bound to acknowledge the owner and send rent and profit to him. But these, in their greed to get it all for themselves, ill-treated the messengers sent to remind them of their duty. And finally, they killed the heir. Jesus, the heir to all Jewish history, stood and challenged the unjust steward, who had shaped and bound tradition to suit themselves. In their very hearing, he spoke to his listeners, implying that their leaders were corrupt with self-interest. He told of a wedding feast where the invited guests suddenly turned cold on the invitation, and of the master's anger, and of how the tables were filled with anybody, just anybody that could be raked in from the byways. And this shaft went home, an arrow straight to the heart of the lawmen of his day, who were accustomed themselves alone to decide the worthiness of men by the rules they had contrived. They in their turn then tried to trap him. Stalking him like clumsy hunters in the woods, they laid a snare, only to find it spring and catch their own feet. What, they said, should we do about tax? You can feel the ripple of interest that always rises when you put your hand on a man's money. The resentment against Rome ready to flare up and trap Jesus in its downfall. Like a boxer, he leans back with the blow and makes it serve his own purpose. Whose is the money you use? Whose head is on the coin? And now you feel the anger as they feel the attack reversing towards them. Caesar's is the reply. And swift comes Jesus' answer. Then pay Caesar his due, and give God his due too. What a cut and thrust reply. They were defeated and disarmed and chastised. He passed on to the Sadducees, who laid another snare. They might have known better than to try with their softly approach, their pretense of seeking advice on a case of law. Brothers were bound to take on the widows of the family, as indeed had Jesus' ancestor Boaz when he took on Ruth, in order to raise up heirs to look after the property. But in the case of the widow, taken on by 7 brothers in succession, they asked, when it came to the resurrection, whose wife will she be? What a sly way of attacking belief in the resurrection, and what a clever way of interfering by raising an issue that was hot and would split any group down the middle. But Jesus once again took the weapon used against him and turned it back upon them. He did not defend the resurrection, he described it, and made the whole argument a platform for a claim they would understand and resent even further. The God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob, he said, is the God of the living, not of the dead. Look at the listeners, the group sitting there, the disciples struggling and puzzling over the meaning of some of the things the Master said, the passers-by on their way to religious duties, stopping to listen a little and finding it was the prophet, hanging on in case anything interesting happened, and the little group of temple men putting their question, outwardly polite, smarting furiously over the mastery that Jesus showed. And at the center, Jesus himself, his senses ever more keenly attuned to the passing time, feeling the rising pressures that would come to a climax, one only climax, when he would stretch out his arms to the wood of the cross. Jesus, seeking always to open men's eyes and ears and hearts, to show them that it is not truth on the lips, but truth in the heart that the Father seeks. Jesus, affronted by the way in which these men of the temple judge everything with scarcely a nod in the direction of God. His anger breaks, and if he had not done enough already, this final challenge in the temple sets his feet on the Via Crucis, the way of the cross. Accepting the cross at our hands, at the hands of all men, he cries the great woes of the day. Woe, God forgive you, you bind heavy burdens of morality of people, and you love to be seen of men, admired, needed, and made much of. God forgive you, you go out for converts and turn them into something twice as bad as yourselves. God forgive you, you make a man swear not by the temple, but by the gold in it, so that you can make him add a little more gold to pay for the oath. God forgive you, you tithe and measure every little thing, but never look up to see who is unjustly treated. God forgive you, you wash the outside of the cup clean, forgetting the inside, and you think a little outer goodness will cover up the mess inside. God forgive you. Men shiver when they walk over a grave, and you are like great marble monuments, covering up dead men's bones. God forgive you. You build memorials to the prophets, and are sure that you would have been wiser in your ancestors' days. But you do the same, all over again, killing the prophets. Ah, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, he weeps for the cunning that shapes ideas to its own will, the stupidity that thinks God can be bought, the greed that would work all to the advantage of self, and the deceit that uses morality as a cover for even deeper sins. We watch with Christ, and the sound of his weeping is in our own hearts, for the hardness of hearts in our family of man. It is so easy for us to achieve a little contentment, to feel that we are honoring God with our help, that a little goodness here and there will balance against our stupid blindness. We are blind because we do not see, except in glimpses, that this whole world is God's harvest, that this challenge of Jesus is eternal. We are there, and he is here, and he asks us, what have we done? What are we going to do with all the world? Not just the little bit of Bedford or Milton Keynes or the Midlands or the UK, but all of it, and the universe and beyond. We are stewards for him. And how shall we answer for the 2/3 of the world ill-equipped and starving? Just as he calls the stewards of the temple to account, so he calls us. It is not that we can do everything that needs to be done. We could not, even if we tried. It is to remind us that all the time our brothers in other places are hungry, starving, in prison, dying, despairing. It is not so that we should break our hearts for what we cannot do, but rather that we should begin to do the little that we can, where we are now, not in some other, more ideal day. That we should hold everything as trust for our brothers. That while we live and work and marry and have families, and walk free and see the beauty of the world and of man's creation too, we should remember the rest of our family. A calling. Are we ready, like Paul, to have all things and rejoice, to have nothing and rejoice? Neither is better than the other. Each has its own particular difficulties. Time itself is a trust, and the time God gives fits exactly into the pattern that he weaves every day out of our choices. To answer his call may lead to the hospital, the cloister, the school, the college of priests, to a wedding ring, or the single life. No matter, it is all on loan to us, and he will ask, what sort of a life have you made with your wife, your children? How is it with you, with your sweetheart, lover, or friends? What about your talents, your car, your computer, your garden? Have you respected them, cared for them, made the most of them, shared them? Or have you wrapped them up carefully and hidden them away? And what about your faith? If it be our job to build beautiful churches or to clean them, to make a home with love or work for peace, to clear up after others or write great music, let all be like a handbook for our worship of the great teacher who reached out to touch men's hearts in the temple that day, that in this our day we may answer the needs of his brothers and ours, and bring bread for the body and food for the soul. For he is here with us, and we are there with him, watching and sensing the pain. We watch so that we may never forget the image of this grieving Christ may be so imprinted on our hearts that we may recognize him everywhere. He teaches through the glory of the temple, the beauty of the world around, the joys and sorrows of human nature, and always leading on to the Father, never turning from the cross, ever caught by the joy that is set before him.